Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Mona Abhari, and I have the pleasure of working with the Vincentian Ohio Action Network and the Think Tanks on Poverty to bring you this webinar series. Others that are also working on this project with me include Leisha, who is an organizer in Newark, Wendy Tarr, who is the executive director of VONE, Stephanie, who is working with Whole Living Recovery and is also in recovery herself, and last but not least, Misty, who works full-time to bridge the gap between those impacted by addiction and the faith community. Today's webinar will be focused on what practical ways our faith communities can support those impacted or struggling with addiction. We will hear from leaders in the faith community who are already doing the amazing life-saving work and how you can replicate that in your own community. One way to practically support those that are struggling with addiction is through medically assisted treatment, or MAT, which you will hear us referred to quite a lot throughout the evening. We're going to go over a brief education of what MAT is, what it looks like, and how it can help those that are struggling with addiction, along with the stigmas and misconceptions that are surrounding MAT. The last time we took the first initial step in the process of fighting addiction by educating ourselves, addressing stigma, and sharing our stories. Barriers of fear, ignorance, and stigma are broken down when people take the risk to break the silence and speak out by sharing their struggles of living with addiction, or by sharing the struggles of a loved one that are also struggling with addiction. From there, we can start to talk about real solutions, and that is what we are doing today. So let's do a quick review of what we went over last week. So bear with me here if any technical difficulties come up. But again, we heard personal stories from those in recovery, those impacted addiction, and by hearing those personal stories and putting a face to the very real problem that affects so many in our communities, it helps ground us in why we need to do this work and why it's so important. We did a little education around addiction, what it looks like and how it works. You can't really fix a problem if you don't understand it. So that education piece is key. We work to address and break down harmful stigmas around addiction, and we did this in a non-judgmental way. We are all here to learn and grow, and when we allow each other to maybe admit to having held any previous stigmas and misconceptions, and doing so without tearing each other down, only then can we actually work together to address this problem. And then we all pledge to do no harm in our communities and pledge to become caring communities, which will also look like caring congregations. And that might not be a familiar term to folks, so we're going to go over what a caring congregation looks like, which we talked about more in depth last time, but we're just do a quick review now. So I highly recommend everyone check out Mental Health Ministry. They are the ones who came up with this 5-step way to become a caring congregation. Their website has amazing resources and more detailed explanation of what each step looks like and how to get there. And we will send that out with a list of other resources too following this webinar. So from the site, it says there are many ways that congregations can begin or expand a ministry to and with persons and their families impacted by addiction. While the journey to become a caring congregation can be described in many different ways, this caring congregations model uses a 5-step approach. These 5 steps include education, covenant or commitment, welcome, support, and advocacy. So quick review of more in depth of what those 5 steps look like. Education is learning about what addiction is, what it looks like, and how it impacts communities. It is always the first step to bringing change, not even just specifically to addiction, but in almost any problem. Education is the first step that's really key to getting where we want to be. Commitment is where we all must be committed to doing no harm in our communities and committed to wanting to help those that are impacted by addiction. We may not even know what this help to those communities looks like, but we are, by committing in the first place to saying, hey, I want to help, I know there's a problem, and taking that step, and that commitment step is really important and an essential step in actually learning how to help those who are struggling. So after you know a little bit about addiction and you're committed to wanting to do no harm, you can start welcoming those impacted by addiction into your communities and being intentional about the way that they are integrated into your faith community, whether that's invited to events, invited to speak, just very involved in the community and in a very intentional way. So after you welcome them in, the natural next step would be to support those that are struggling. And supporting them can look different, and there's many ways to support them. One way that we are going to talk about extensively today is through medically assisted treatment. But other ways looks like providing counseling, training, supporting family members, etc. And last, after you're educated on addiction, you're committed to helping, you welcome those in, and you support them, the natural next step would be to advocate for change around addiction. You've seen what support and welcoming those in the community looks like, so then you do the work of advocating for more help in more communities to follow your lead and to becoming a caring congregation. So now that we've reviewed, we're gonna hear from our first speaker, Trish Perry, who is from Ohio Can and has an amazing story to tell and does amazing work in her community. And her story will focus around what it looks like to meet those who are struggling with addiction where they're at. So Trish, I'm gonna toss it over to you.
So my name is Trish Perry, and I am the county coordinator for Ohio Can, and I'm also the co-founder of Newark Homeless Outreach. My battle started about 11 years ago with my son when I found out he was an IV heroin user. So I have had to change gears over those 11 years. I started out thinking you could, push them away, use the tough love, and all of those old school things. And what I found out is it's about compassion and caring and meeting people where they're at. My son is currently in recovery, and as we talk about medically assisted treatment, he is doing the methadone treatment. He drives to Columbus every day to get his dose of methadone that helps with the withdrawal and the cravings of the opiates. Which one of my goals going forward is to get a methadone clinic here in Licking County. I think it's important to be able to serve the community in all capacities of medically assisted treatment. Suboxone, buprenorphine, is a great tool, but what we have found with some of the providers I've spoke with is that the buprenorphine is not touching the fentanyl. And for those of you who follow the overdose stats, right now we don't have anything but fentanyl. So trying to take someone who's using 3 grams of fentanyl a day and give them something that they were using for heroin to treat heroin just isn't working anymore. So the methadone is the best thing for fentanyl.
Trish?
Yes.
This is Wendy. Can you help us out? Can you explain a little bit about the buprenorphine? Like, what does that actually do? Because there's some folks on this call that may be less familiar with the 2 types of medically assisted treatment that you're referring to.
Well, the buprenorphine, which is called Suboxone, and there is also Vivitrol, is the Suboxone is a strip that you can take, whether depending on how much you've used, and it helps block the receptors in your brain to keep you from having those cravings, and it also keeps you from having the withdrawal that you normally have on opiates. Those are prescribed normally 1 or 2 of the 2 milligram strips per day. They in turn work to wean you off of them over a period of time. Now, I will tell you, I know people that have been on that treatment for 10 years, but they are successful people in the society, paying their bills, paying their way, and if it works, it works. And then the Vivitrol shot is a shot you can get monthly that works basically the same, but instead of having to take a medication every day, this shot works throughout a 25 to 28 day period, depending on yourself. Each individual is different. So then the methadone, of course, is a treatment that you have to get on a daily basis because it is still considered a narcotic, and it is another a way to help you with the cravings and the withdrawal from opiates. And as I was saying, with the fentanyl being so, all there is fentanyl, the treatment providers I'm speaking to are saying that the buprenorphine just isn't strong enough to withstand those cravings for that fentanyl. Fentanyl is a whole different monster.
What is fentanyl, Trish?
Animal tranquilizer.
Mm-hmm. And they're lacing it into why are they putting it into the drugs? Who's putting it in there?
Well, at first it was, your fentanyl comes from China. And they would lace it into the heroin to not only make the heroin go be, more plentiful, or, they're stashed to be more, but it also is more addictive. Right now they're lacing everything. You can go get pressed pills, Molly, methamphetamine. The coroner's report that I got a couple of weeks ago of the 24 deaths here in Licking County that were overdoses, there wasn't no heroin. It was all fentanyl and meth. And that is why I provide fentanyl testing strips to people, both down at the outreach. I give them fentanyl testing strips so they can test the drugs. And that way, if it is fentanyl, especially people who use meth, then they know to use less, never use alone. We practice those harm reduction, those to get across to people so they understand. Never use alone. Use less if it's laced with fentanyl. Make sure you have Narcan on hand. Make sure everyone around you is trained in Narcan.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I knew you were talking about some of the medically assisted treatment options, and I just wanted to prod you a bit, because part of this is to help folks begin to understand more about these options and what they do and why they're being utilized by people who are struggling with addiction. So, if I threw you off course.
And even some of the jails, I believe there's a couple in Ohio, but other states have really opened up to the medically assisted treatment in their jails and in their prisons, because it is proven that people can live successful lives with medically assisted treatment, because addiction is a disease. It requires a medication just like other diseases.
So Trish, in the homeless outreach that you do, can you explain a bit about what that looks like and how some of the faith communities have been taking part in supporting that locally?
We have a couple different faith-based communities that work with us, Licking County Champions Network and also Crossroad Crusaders. We share resources and we share, you know, if somebody needs something. But we also, I've trained them to use naloxone. We have a church over in Heath that has pledged $100 a month for the next 12 months that will help me buy fentanyl testing strips. I also recently had a church donate $1,500 to help us buy our property, because they like that we are out there on the street, boots on the ground, never miss a day, and we're making sure people get naloxone, harm reduction supplies, medical supplies, and they want to be a part of that. They want to help people to get better.
Mm-hmm. So when they come to your tent, explain it for those that aren't in Newark. They're coming to you. You're on the corner in the community, and you're passing out these items and food, and just checking in on people, checking in with them, and letting them know where they can go to get resources if they need it.
Right. So we have food. We grill hot dogs every week. And then we have donations of side items. And this week we're going to have pizza. So just different organizations bring down food. Pride is going to do something. So Whole Living Recovery is going to do a meal. So it is a community thing. And then so they get their food. They can come through a line. They can get drinks to take with them. During the summer, we have frozen water as well as regular water. And then we have non-perishables, snacks, fresh fruit. Then when they get down to the end, we give gallon jugs of water for those that are outside so that they can wash their hands. We have one volunteer that makes hand sanitized wipes so that people can wash their hands that are living out under a bridge, because there is, during COVID especially, there was no access to restrooms and to showering. And then I also supply harm reduction supplies. I have bags, and in those bags I give clean syringes, I give naloxone, I give fentanyl testing strips. Whatever is donated to me, I give back out to those that struggle with addiction. I also offer them a resource guide every week. I've had many come back to the corner with their families and give me a hug and say, I've got 3 weeks clean. I went to this treatment place. That is why we have to meet them where they're at, and where they're at most of the time is in the street, under a bridge, or in an abandoned house. And that's what I do. I mean, one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do was to give my son clean use supplies. But I don't feel that he deserves to die of hepatitis just because he has a disease. And the same goes for medical bills. Harm reduction. My son has $1 million in medical bills. And he has hepatitis. He's lost part of his arm. If we get to people in the beginning stages, we can keep them from having these diseases until they're ready to go into treatment. That's what it's about. It's about meeting them where they're at and not leaving them there.
Yeah. Thank you, Trish. I think we're going to move on and talk a little bit more about what is medically assisted treatment. So the Federal Food and Drug Administration defines medically assisted treatment as the use of medication in combination with counseling and behavioral therapies, which is effective in the treatment of opiate use disorders, and it can help some people to sustain their recovery, as Trish was describing. we're having these webinars because, you know, we believe that more must be done to facilitate treatment options at the development of therapies to address opiate use disorder as a chronic disease that has long-lasting effects. And this means helping more people secure medically assisted treatment, which requires us to break the stigma that's often associated with some of the medications that are used to treat folks that struggle with opiates and other addiction to other drugs. It also requires us to find new and more effective ways to advance the use of medical therapy for the treatment of opiates and other drugs. So we're talking about opiates in part here when it comes to some of these medically assisted treatments, because a lot of them are the ones that we're talking about apply to the use of opiates, whereas there's some other types of drugs that people may use that don't have medically assisted treatment options available to them. But I think that part of what we're saying here is we would love to see these types of things expand so that people that are struggling with addiction have a range of options to help them as they are, you know, either in active addiction or seeking to be into recovery. Examples of medically assisted treatment that are approved by the FDA for the treatment of opioid dependence includes buprenorphine, methadone, naltrexone, and naloxone. All of these treatments have been demonstrated to be safe and effective when it's in combination too with counseling and psychosocial support. So Trish talked a little bit about, you know, Suboxone is one of the names of these. We call them different things because there's sometimes there are the names of the actual manufacturers of those drugs. So like of the medically assisted treatment. So the names might be a little bit confusing, but you know, Vivitrol is the shot, Suboxone is the strips. There's different types of ways that people can receive these things, and so we'll try to do our best to explain them as people are going through their comments. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay. Mona, do you want to do the common misconceptions?
Yeah. Thanks, Wendy, for that. And then I just want to thank Trish again for sharing all of her knowledge and story around all of that. I think it's so important to really understand that sometimes doing no harm looks like meeting people where they're at, and Trish and what she does is a perfect example of that. So thank you for sharing. I know a common misconception around addiction is the only solution is abstinence and full recovery, like immediately. So and speaking of that, it's a perfect segue into kind of debunking a lot of stigmas around medically assisted treatment that I didn't really know existed, but when doing research and talking to more folks, they're there, just as there's misconceptions and stigmas around addiction itself. So it's really important to talk about it and break them down and make sure that we don't tear each other down if we do hold any of these stigmas or misconceptions. We're all here to learn and grow and shouldn't be judging one another if we did hold a misconception or stigma. So I'm going to go through these and kind of debunk them a bit, and then we'll move on. But the first one is that MAT and abstinence work are the same. When MAT has a proven track record of helping individuals with addiction and opioid use disorder beat their addiction. Because it is an evidence-based program, there is plenty of information supporting the treatment. So it's the combination of the medically assisted treatment and behavioral therapy and counseling that work, and it doesn't necessarily work the same as just abstinence. That might not be the right thing for a lot of people that are struggling with addiction. The next stigma is that MAT isn't covered by insurance, when it actually is covered by Medicaid FFS programs in over 31 states, with many of the drugs used in those programs appearing on the preferred drug list of many state agencies. There's actually 2 of the drugs, I don't recall which one of them, but they are classified as essential medications as well in several states. So it is covered by insurance in a lot of states. The third stigma is that MAT can disrupt the recovery process, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. This myth claims that using medically assisted treatment hinders the recovery process, making it harder for the patient to distance themselves from the drug. People may see these names and say, "Oh, well, that's just another drug. Why would you give someone that's addicted to drugs more drugs, right?" When in actuality, MAT has been proven to help patients through the recovery process and reduces their overall risk of mortality. So there's actual evidence to back it up. And just as Trish spoke about her son and the folks that she's helped, it actually helps rather than the reverse, or what the stigma claims that it does. The fourth one is that the risk of overdose increases with MAT. The fact is that with each use of an opioid drug, the patient increases their risk of a life-threatening overdose. But once a patient completes the detoxification process and MAT begins, they are better able to resist the temptation offered by the opioids. With the use of medically assisted treatment, overdoses are prevented and a patient's quality of life dramatically improves. The fifth stigma is that MAT replaces one addiction with another. So that kind of goes back to the disrupting the recovery process. Like, well, if they're addicted to heroin or XYZ, then giving them this, it's just interchangeable. And again, that's not necessarily true. MAT works to establish a bridge between both the behavioral and biological aspects of opioid addiction. So by combining the treatments, right, not just having MAT, not just only counseling, but combining the two in a holistic approach to recovery, doctors can better treat various types of opioid use disorder, which again looks different to everyone. So, and some people don't need to use MAT to get better, but it is an option out there that has saved so many lives. The next one is that MAT only works for severe cases. When MAT works for patients who are experiencing varying degrees of addiction. A wide variety of medications are used to help patients overcome their urge to use opioids. So just because there's a few different ones that do different things, that also need to work for different patients of different addiction levels, so to speak. The next one is that MAT is a short-term solution. When MAT is best used on a long-term basis. Patients who have been on an MAT-based plan for up to 2 years are often the most successful. When a patient has been successful using an MAT-based plan, their physician may be able to taper their medication use, allowing them to go off the MAT program completely as long as there are no other stressors. So in the same way that, mental health is an ongoing healing process and work, it can be a long-term and is a long-term solution. When you look at naloxone, for example, that reverses an overdose, that might not be seen as a long-term solution, but it's a solution nonetheless that is life-saving, right? The next and last stigma I have on here, and this by no means is an exhaustive list of all the stigmas out there around MAT, but that it's too expensive. When again, it is covered by insurance plans. There's a lot of treatment plans that are affordable when covered by insurance, and there's also a lot of payoff plans as well. And you could, when you get into the details of it, there might be other justice issues there around the cost of it. That doesn't necessarily mean that the MAT itself isn't working or isn't helpful. And you could talk about the healthcare system, all of that, and surrounding that. So those are a few common stigmas and misconceptions around MAT, and taking that first step and addressing them and working past them can help us get to the real solutions and how MAT is one of those real solutions. And then here's just some more evidence to prove that it does work and can save lives. Research shows that a combination of medication and therapy can successfully treat these disorders, and for some people struggling with addiction. MAT can help sustain recovery as well, and MAT can be used to prevent or reverse an overdose like naloxone. MAT decreases opioid use, opioid-related overdose deaths, criminal activity, and infectious disease transmission. After I'm always struggle to say this, buprenorphine became available in Baltimore, heroin overdose deaths decreased by 37% during an IDA study period, which ended in 2009. And lastly, MAT increases social functioning and retention in treatment. Patients treated with medication were more likely to remain in therapy compared to patients receiving treatment that did not include medication. So again, MAT may not look like the solution to everyone, but it is a life-saving solution out there that should be available to anyone struggling with addiction. And a good segue into that is the education around it. And then I've linked the resources to all of that at the bottom if you would like to check that out. So now we're going to go ahead and go into breakout rooms. Now that we've discussed a little bit about what MAT is, some of the stigma around it, and we're going to have an open discussion around it. So up on the screen, you're going to see that there's some questions to get you started. By no means you have to stick to it. This is an open discussion, but it could help get the ball rolling. So again, as I said earlier, we shouldn't be tearing each other down or judging anyone if they didn't hold any of these misconceptions. So you can see that's a question up there. If you've held any of those before this call, this is an open space to talk about that and help each other work through that. So it is okay if you did, but we're going to go ahead and break up and discuss. We'll probably take 10 minutes or so just to talk about what we've learned so far, and we'll come back. So bear with me here as we work on the tech side of this. All right, here we go. Jill and Whitlow, can you both hear me? Hi, Joe.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Were you jumping between rooms?
I don't know what happened. I was like pushed to join room and I guess I'm here with you. I don't.
Fine. It's lonely on when I run the breakout rooms because I don't get anyone. So I'm glad that you got put in here randomly. What are your thoughts so far? Well, I don't know. You're in Newark, right?
No, I'm in Zanesville.
Zanesville. I feel like I've seen you on another call. I don't know if it was for this project or something else.
Probably. I usually do a lot of webinars. I
Mm-hmm.
try to get as much, education as with everything that's, happening. I work with Leisha in the Zanesville think tank on poverty.
Yeah,
Um, so you might have seen me, with a lot of things with her too.
probably. Yeah, do you know Kellen Patey?
No.
He doesn't he's not employed by them, or like he kind of does a lot of work for them, but he's on a lot of think tank calls. So maybe you were on one of those, or maybe on a thing. I don't know. I have a lot of Zoom calls, so you
Me
too.
too.
Yeah.
I'm doing my practicum with Leisha right now. I'm taking social work assistant at Zane State College. So my internship for that is Bridges of Poverty, Getting Ahead. So I'm learning that with her. So we do practicum together. And then next, which will run until December, and then January, hopefully I can be the facilitator in my community for my second practicum before I graduate. I also run the Respite Center, which is a day center for the homeless. And then I'm a recovering addict and stuff my own self. And so I do a lot.
Yeah, you got a plate full of stuff there. How long have you been in recovery?
3 years, roughly.
Awesome. Is that what kind of moved you? I know this is not like the topic we're supposed to be talking about, but is that what moved you to do the work you want to do?
A lot of it moved me by my own experience and what I wish that was out there. I'm also a survivor of human trafficking, so I also do my own story and stuff too here in the community to break the stigma of these are somebody's, family members still out there, regardless of why they're there. I do a lot to try to do a lot of education about just accepting people and meeting them right where they're at. Also, so I guess I use my experiment to help people like Leisha and them that don't understand, but have the passion to help change, to get them to understand a little bit. But it's only just like that little bit of what's really out there and what really goes on. So it's very hard. I'm like the only advocate person that has this experience standing up in my community to advocate for the people. So it's very difficult when you have people that's in position and you're trying to explain something to them and it's like banging your head up against the wall.
Right.
Also, so it's like down at my center, I have Narcan training there. My students that's in social work, they are now getting Narcan training because I had the advisor talked her into like, hey, we're going to be social workers. We need to have this training because of the epidemic and stuff that's going on. So I have that. They're starting to do that. So it's, but I guess there's a lot of stigma, I guess, with some of it because of the getting high off of the medicine, that some people can abuse it and everything. And I really hope that the medical field, the FDA and them can approve more shots, you know what I mean? So that people will not abuse it, because we're addicts. We're always going to manipulate a system and stuff until we change. And what really changed me was when I went to prison, the brief intervention thinking for a change program. It really has to do with your thought process and not what actually the drugs or anything was a whole thing for me.
Yeah. I have a lot of friends who and loved ones that are either in recovery or still struggling with addiction. My best friend of, oh gosh, like 15, 16 years just checked into rehab a few days ago, and it's, and I don't, I've had my fair share with like substance abuse stuff. and definitely have worked through that and totally resonate with it being like a behavioral thing. And then if you have like trauma or mental illness or ADD or, you know, or other traumatic, you know, life experiences, it can kind of exacerbate that behavior. And there's just such stigma around, like, well, why can't you just cut it out? Or, or like, why, you know, why do you use in the first place? Or, you know, things like that. So and that's kind of the key with everything, is like breaking education and then breaking that stigma. But it's really hard too. Like there's some people that just don't want to hear it, or like there's so
Right.
much stigma around different things that are pretty like sexist and, you know, racial and all of that. And so
My thing is, like, you know, commitment is a hard thing. You know, community commitment is a big thing. And I always try to, I hate to say this because it's, I don't know if you want to say how to take it, but I always try to explain to Alicia and I'm like, they're like, why can't they ever stop or whatever? And I'm like, because they know exactly what that drug or that aspect or that $20 is going to do for them. You know, it's a constant, you know, thing. And if they quit, they don't know, you know, foresee the future. They can't see none of that. It's not a commitment. And I'm like, there's no community commitment. We all start things, but we never finish it or stay committed to it. So why should they? You know what I mean? They know that this is going to be the constant thing. It's going to be the same thing, you know, every time. So that's why they keep doing it. And a lot of things is there's nothing for them to do to change their life. Like, you know what I mean? There's no programs. There's nothing. Everything is so, I know it's so severe, but everything's so book and, you know, like classroom formatted. You know, nothing's fun. Nothing's, you know, showing them, you know, the change or give them a hope process of things, you know. And that's like, in our community, it's very hard with faith and addiction, because then everybody interprets the Bible the wrong, you know, differently,
right.
you know, things of it. And it was like, that's where my road started, was in a church. The lady had, was doing a presentation on human trafficking. And then I had, you know, stood up, and that's my process. I didn't go through recovery or nothing else. I just went through like the God thing. Like it was a slow progress, like everything just disappeared, you know. That works for some people it don't. And that's the hardest thing to figure out, because a lot of people that's recovering are trying to go through addiction to come out. They do not want to hear nothing about God, because God's put them through all this bad life. God's done this. If it was true, why did God do this, this, and this?
Right.
So that's a hard connection to do.
Yeah, I totally relate to, like, or I mean, just there, people like these churches and stuff and faith communities can actually be like really helpful places, right? But at the same time, I know I've struggled with this. If I did something wrong, or if I, like, you know, drank or partied or whatever, right? I was met with, God hates you, or, you know, you aren't deserving of a good life or a good like relationship or friends. You're a terrible person. And it's the very church that turned, or like the very like religious institution that turned them away and said, you're a bad person for doing XYZ. Or it's like a religious person might even say that, maybe not the church, but like, you know, someone that is very religious could, you know, is going to look down on you and say, well, you're terrible for doing that, or, you know, work above it, things like that.
I think the society, when society changes, it changes people's beliefs, values, and everything. You know what I mean? Once society accepts something, the person accepts it, you know, as a community or whatever. And I think it really has the same, you know, thing with it. Like once we accepted transgender, gays, or, you know, being a homeless person or something, and then it sees the trend, you know what I mean? I think it has a lot to do with it, like a domino effect.
Right. And like the way you can get to that is like raising a public consciousness, and you do that by like breaking down stigma and stuff like that. That's another problem too, especially with like people my age, is just this immediate like, if you don't share my view, I'm cutting you off, right? Or like, I don't want to be friends with you if you said this one bad thing. And like that's just we need to allow people to grow, right? And there is a hard line, right, of inexcusable behavior. But there, more often than not, I see just so much shame around people that hold like stigmas around something. And it's like you you need to allow that education to kind of sit in, and either you can see that at a certain point when people aren't willing to accept that, or like they're set in their ways, and that's when you can kind of call it quits. But there's that immediate no, we don't share the same views, there's no way we can talk about it, is really polarizing and like really against what we're trying to do.
There's this one comment that was made, and when I was out using in one of the shacks, it was said, "Why hide it? God knows everything you do, so why hide it?" You know, so that was like one of the things that was like, so why should I hide my drug uses or anything? That's right, God does know. You know what I mean? So that was just something that stuck with me.
Yeah, sure. All right, I think I'm going to bring people back in, but it's so awesome talking to you, Jill. I kind of want to hear your story a little more at some point. I'm sure we'll cross paths again.
Anytime I doesn't sugarcoat anything, I educate. I just, so I'm available anytime. You can just get my contact from Leisha or whatever.
Yeah, I totally will. And you're in Zanesville, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I would love to interview more and hear more about your story.
Thank you.
Yeah. In here. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We'll wait for everyone else to come back in.
I think we're back in, Mona.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Stephanie to move us along. Let me get the slides up again. I'm misspeaking. I apologize. We're actually going to hear from two other leaders in the faith community, and then we'll go over to Stephanie. We're going to hear from Nikki Hogarth. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Who is the leader of the family ministry at First Presbyterian Church. And we're also going to hear from Josh Lawson, who is a pastor at Evangelical United Church of Christ. So Nikki, I'll give the floor to you.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Mona and Wendy, for inviting me to share. And I had the chance to be with Trish in the breakout room, and I so appreciated all the information that she shared as well. Let's see. I need to not be on full screen so I can look at my notes. Here we go. Okay. So I've been working at the church for about 9 years now, and my role is in Christian education inside the church and community outreach outside of the church. Before this, I was a community organizer, and I did work in Baltimore, Maryland, and Dayton, Ohio, doing some grassroots organizing with congregations, schools, and communities. And so I have a deep-rooted passion for justice. I have a family history of addiction. My uncle passed away of a heroin overdose many, many years ago after coming back from serving in the service. And although I never had the opportunity to meet him, his struggle with addiction and his also his death haunted my grandparents the rest of their life, and was a part of the framework of our family until they passed away, really. So a lot of this work is personal, and a lot of it, resonates with me. So when I began working with the church, I began doing prison ministry, a Bible study inside the jail. And we quickly, as it is with prison ministries, realized that people were coming and going faster than we could even realize before working inside. And so we began asking questions about community support and what it looked like when you were coming out of jail. And really, we learned that there wasn't a lot going on in Delaware to support folks as they returned, and came up with the idea to create a community of grace. This community was intended to be a organization of congregations that would support returning citizens, help connect them to services. A lot of the individuals that are coming out of jail, as you all know, also wrestle with addiction. And so we began working with the Reentry Coalition to create a community of grace that was gracious in nature, that refused stigma, that created safe landing grounds, soft landings for those that were coming back to our community. With this work, we got connected with Jacob's Way, which is a sober living community that was rooted in Columbus and is now in Delaware. So I kind of share all that information to kind of give you a framework of how our congregation began to be educated around addiction, reentry, and working with individuals, because we're a 200-year-old Presbyterian middle-class congregation that 10 years ago would have no idea how to begin engaging in this work. So it has been a process. I will say that Wendy came to our congregation and did a reentry simulation for us when we were first began this community of grace work. So some of the ease or the way that we're engaging in this work now was because of this foundation that's probably within the last 5 years we've been working with individuals that are coming out of incarceration or treatment centers. So one of the things that we have created as a ministry, it's called Laundry Love. And Laundry Love, before COVID, would meet monthly on the fourth Wednesday of the month, and we would do laundry with community members for 3 hours. We would serve a meal at the laundromat and provide the laundry, and our volunteers wear aprons with quarters in it, and we pop quarters and we visit with people for 3 hours. It's a beautiful ministry. I recommend it. It's so hands-on and relational, which is the key. The one thing that we found as a congregation was that we were coming in contact with people that weren't usually coming to church ministries, if you will. So these were not the same folks that would come to our fourth Thursday meal, or anyone who felt any bit of discomfort coming into a congregation. So I would say that that's one of the most powerful things or important things about engaging in this work, is being comfortable outside the walls of your church, and doing ministry and creating place for ministry that does not exist there if you want to reach more people. We've really quickly found that needles were falling out of laundry loads and left on the ground. We found small bags in the bathroom with residual powder on them. We were witnessing people, they would come, they'd drop off their clothes, they would leave, and they would come back visibly high. I mean, and for us, this isn't something, I don't think it just was a different dynamic than we had experienced before. I would think at this point, some of our members or some church members might say, shut it down. This isn't a safe environment to be volunteering in. We have a kids corner set up, but that wasn't the case. So we did a big Narcan handout. So we decided that we would, approach it a bit differently. We had a new treatment center that was new to town come and pass out information. And opportunity to guests that came to Laundry Love. So we did the Narcan, we did the MAT. We always have someone on site from Jacob's Way there to talk about sober living opportunities if anybody is ever ready. We also have residents from Jacob's Way, the men's and the women's house, volunteering at every Laundry Love night, so that there are folks on hand from the rooms that can say, hey, do you want to go to a meeting with me or something like that. We, in addition, also had all of the meeting information for NA or AA there. We had temp job agencies come and offer jobs with the understanding that they were offering jobs to folks that had felony records or anything like that. You know, we were trying to remove as many obstacles as we could. And our church leadership, all of our volunteers just rolled with it. They were, the Narcan went in 5 seconds. I mean, not literally, maybe 5 minutes. And we're currently looking at ways that we can add more harm reduction strategies to the ministries we're doing right now. So currently we serve 3 meals a month, and we deliver groceries twice a month. So we're doing a food delivery to 2 of our most vulnerable neighborhoods 5 times a month. And so one aspect that we're developing right now would be to add Narcan and fentanyl testing strips to the meals that we're handing out, or as an option if they're needed. And so that has been approved by our church, and there's a organization called Project Dawn that works with our health department, where you can do some training to get Narcan kits, but we're working on trying to find a source to receive these items, and then we can move forward with that. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nikki. You're doing amazing, amazing work and leading such a great example for all of us. Next, I think we have Josh.
All right. Thank you, Mona. And I want to say thanks to Nikki and Trish for your stories. Doing great work out there, much needed in our communities. I'm a pastor in Southern Ohio, Sauter County, Evangelical United Church of Christ. I also chair our faith-based subcommittee of our local opioid consortium. It's a local coalition of community leaders seeking to respond to the overdose and opioid crisis. I'm also an author. I've got an upcoming book called The Face of Addiction, where I tell the stories of 12 people who have suffered through addiction here in Southern Ohio. So I'm involved a lot in my county with work related to the opioid crisis, and that work kind of revolves around 2 focuses: storytelling on the one hand, and then practical tools of harm reduction on the other. We've, for instance, hosted panel discussions in our community where we've invited 5 or 6 people from the recovery community to come and sit on the panel, kind of like this one, and just tell their stories, much like you've already done in this series, the Do No Harm series, and speak specifically to the question for church leaders and faith leaders to come and sit and listen to, of how the faith community, or in our case, it's mostly churches, Christian churches, have either helped or hurt them in their recovery. So we kind of build it as a listening event for faith leaders to come and just sit and listen. You know, I find that historically faith communities are more used to speaking to their communities rather than listening to their communities. And when it comes to this crisis, there is a huge turn that I think we need to take among our faith communities to do more listening than we do speaking, to listen to the people who are directly affected in this crisis and who can tell us exactly what are the needs of people who use drugs, what are the needs of people who are struggling with addiction. I've also hosted the Locks and Save service here at the church at the UCC in Portsmouth with my colleague Blythe Barno. She's with Faith in Public Life Ohio. She's traveled the state a little bit doing these services, especially during Overdose Awareness Week at the end of August, where basically we have a memorial for people whose lives have been lost to overdose or to the war on drugs, and then also attend that service and that memorial with a practical training on how to use Narcan and a distribution for all the people who come and be involved in that. And the Narcan distribution is kind of what we've focused on through the church where I pastor and through my work so far with the opioid consortium. We've been able to partner with our local health department as part of the Project Dawn expansion, which Nikki mentioned in her talk. Project Dawn is a state-funded effort to provide naloxone training and distribution in various locations around the state in each county. So we've been able to make the church an actual Project Dawn site in our county. So there are 3 now in Savannah County, Project Dawn sites. There's SOMC, which is our local hospital. There's our local health department, and then there's our church. And basically what that has given us the ability to do is to participate more consistently and more fully in Narcan distribution and training. We have a lady through the church that we work with here who does a lot of harm reduction work on the ground in our community. And she has been our faith recovery navigator, is what we call her. We're trying to build out this model among all of the churches in our county. And there are 150 plus churches in our county. I don't know about yours, but there's quite a few down in Southern Ohio. And we're seeking to expand this model to where we have in every congregation at least one person, the faith recovery navigator, who serves as a direct point of contact between the local congregation and the community of people who use drugs or the people who are in recovery, who kind of have their ear to the ground, who know what's going on, who know what the needs are, and can serve as a point of contact, a resource for those people and the congregation members. And this lady in our church, through the consortium, Jessica, she was doing this work prior to becoming involved with us, but through our participation in the Project Dawn expansion, we have been able to provide her with even more Narcan to share with people in our community who may not be likely to come to the health department, who may not be likely to come to a church service or to a place in public where there is a Narcan training or Narcan distribution going on because of the stigma, because of all the things that surrounding, the complications surrounding them in their life. So the way it's worked out is kind of, she's a point of contact between the church and the people who use drugs in our community. And she's also been able to engage in a lot of what I call street outreach or street ministry. So she's able to go to people where they are, which I think is a big part of the focus of this webinar series, Do No Harm, meeting people where they are, which is a kind of a guiding light behind the principle of harm reduction. So she's formed a real solid relationship of trust with many people who are, for whatever reason, not only to them, not likely to come to the health department or to a church service to get the help that they need. But she's able to go out. In the last 2 months alone, we've distributed around 100 kits, which is pretty substantial for our area. And I think this kind of work is important because, and this is what I tell most of the people that I work with among the churches, is that harm reduction is a pro-life issue as much as anything else is. And most of the people that I contact and speak with and work with are Christians. And so I tell them that you can't take seriously the injunction of Jesus in Matthew 25, that whatever you have done or have not done to the most vulnerable members of your community, those who are imprisoned, those who are sick, those who are lame, and I include that to mean those who use drugs, you have or have not done to Christ. So it's a real point of contact between the people of faith in my community who are interested but not sure how they can get involved in recovery work or harm reduction work in the community. I think it's really a no-brainer for people of faith. At least in theory. There's still a lot of stigma prevailing throughout Central Appalachia and Southern Ohio where I work against MAT, against people in general. There's a strong abstinence-only tradition down here among the AA and NA communities. So we're still working to educate, to equip people, to get them to sit down and listen to the stories of people with lived experience who can kind of expand their worldview and see that there's a whole lot more going on here than what a lot of the people, in my neck of the woods have commonly thought about when it comes to drug use and drug addiction. So that's kind of my tagline, what I say as part of my work, and I'll sum it up with that. I tell people, yes, Jesus saves, but so does naloxone. So we're trying to encourage people to find practical ways to express their faith through harm reduction. Thanks, Mona. I'll turn it back over to you with that.
I want to jump in real quick. Sorry, I keep interjecting myself. Josh, I don't think that we have said on this call thus far. Can you just do a very quick, 3-minute, what is naloxone? How does it work? What does it look like? How do you, not teach us how to administer, but, for somebody who maybe hasn't seen it or isn't completely sure what you're talking about?
Sure. So naloxone is more commonly known by its popular brand name, Narcan. So it's an opiate overdose reversal drug. So if somebody is suffering an overdose through the use of opioids or opiates, naloxone can literally bring them back from the point of death. The way that opioids or opiates work on a person's respiratory system, especially when we're talking about fentanyl, like Trish talked about, and the fentanyl analogs that are out there now that are being cut with so many other substances, methamphetamines, heroin, whatever it might be, to the point where many people are using substances and are not aware that there's fentanyl in them. And fentanyl is 50, depending on what kind it is, it's 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine and street heroin. So it can act upon a person's respiratory system very quickly and shut it down. That's why it's important not to use alone. It's why it's important to know how to use Narcan to carry it with you, people who use drugs as well. So that if they experience an overdose and their respiratory system begins to shut down, somebody can be on hand who can administer Narcan. And it comes in a couple different forms, depending on where you get it. The more popular brand Narcan is a nasal injection. It's very simple to use. You can get it from your local pharmacy, CVS. They should be able to provide that for you. There's also an intravenous form that you can use that you can inject into the thigh. It's very simple. I mean, if you've ever gone through a training, it's not difficult to use, and you can't do really any harm with it. So if somebody's experiencing an overdose and you're not really sure if opioids or opiates are involved, yeah, it's a good idea. Go ahead and hit them with Narcan. It's not going to hurt them, but it very well may save their life. So it's a real tool of practical resurrection. So that's why for people of faith, I say this is a great way. You want to practice your faith. You want to make it tangible, practical, real. You want to save lives. You want to bring people back from the death. This is a pro-life issue, man. We're keeping people alive. We're keeping them healthy in the hope that they'll choose in their own self-determination. They'll be able to get back and recover their lives. And so that's why I say it's kind of a no-brainer. But I hope that kind of answers your question there, Wendy, for anybody who might be interested.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Since we're on like an actual Zoom meet, it's not a webinar. So like if there's any other questions that folks have, and I'll turn it back over to you too, Mona. But I know we have a chat function. Folks can put their thing in the chat, but you could also like raise your hand on the thing that we can call on you, or if you have a question or you've been hearing people talking about this and you're just not completely clear what it is, or you want somebody to explain further, like that's part of what this call is about, is to create a conversation for folks in the faith communities and others, that would like to learn more. And I know I lost Mona on the chat. Fred had asked something about where to get the items, and I logged off the call and had to get back on. So I don't know exactly what it said, but I just don't want to lose track of that question or any other questions that folks may have.
Yeah, no worries. So Fred's question was, who administers the MAT programs and who monitors this program? Do all counties have the MAT program? I wish I could answer this, but I don't want to misspeak, so maybe I'll toss that over to Trish, Nikki, or Josh, if any of you know. And I think everyone else was just saying that they had to leave, unfortunately. But if you do have another question, throw it in the chat now before we move on to the last thing. But also if Trish, Nikki, or Josh, if you know the answer to who administers the MAT programs, who monitors this program, do all counties have the MAT program? Go for it.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Mona. I mean, it varies, from one county to the next, so it's really hard to answer for somebody somewhere else. There's quite a few treatment providers in my county that offer MAT. Also, the hospital is equipped. They have a program as well where they equip people with medication or refer them to somebody who does. So it really comes down to what's available in your local county. So I always encourage people, find your local coalition. Get involved, get on their email list, start going to meetings. They'll provide you with all the information you need so that you can know what resources are locally available for the people in your circle who may need.
And what coalition are you talking about, Josh?
Well, many counties have their own, like mine is the Scioto County Collaborative Opioid Consortium. So I know there are coalitions in the neighboring counties, Pike County, Lawrence County, and Ross County. I'm not sure if there are any counties in the state of Ohio, or where I'm at least right now, who don't have one. But, to provide that information is something I can't really do. But, that's why I encourage people to search that out. The best way is to contact your local health department or a treatment provider who can point you to a local coalition so you can get all that information.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Another question that's in the chat, maybe Trish, if you're still on, could speak to it, is asking to explain a little more about fentanyl strips. And Nikki and Josh, feel free if Trish is not on here.
So I can, I don't know all about fentanyl strips, but my basic understanding of them are that they are strips that you can dip into whatever it is, whatever drug of choice is being used to identify whether or not there is fentanyl present in that drug. And that can then, was it, Josh, were you saying, if fentanyl is present, use less? Like that's, that would be another harm reduction strategy or communication tool, or maybe it was Trish that was saying that. But so it's a way for you to identify fentanyl in whatever you're using before you use it, so you know the risk.
Yeah.
I think I'm unmuted now. Hello?
Hey, Trish. Sorry.
Hey, okay.
Yeah, this is all. But go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the fentanyl testing strips are basically just like a urinalysis strip. And it takes very, very little of the drug. So when they either have it in their baggie or in their cooker, they can just add the excess water, add some water on there, stick that strip right in there, and in 10, 15 seconds, they have the results. And again, as everybody, I think Josh said, it's very important. If it has fentanyl in it, you want to remember the main things. Do not use alone. Use less. You can always use more. Do not push in faster. That's the other thing. Use slow. But the biggest thing that I'll tell you where harm reduction is on all of this is do not use alone, and make sure everyone around you is trained in naloxone. Billy just spoke at the Overdose Awareness Day rally, and that was his advice to anyone who is still out there using, because people are going to continue to use. Right now, it is about making sure they stay alive. So they practice the harm reduction. Do not use alone. Do not, make sure everybody has proper training in naloxone, and use slow.
Trish,
Yes.
I'm curious if you could share a little bit about, like, when you're working with folks, have you had people come that have been able to seek other treatment options that want to get off of drugs or stop using drugs? Can you share anything about that, or Josh? Is that part of when you talk to people about harm reduction?
Yeah, there was a lady who was part of the CNN video. Wendy, you know what I'm talking about. She came down. She actually was interviewed on that CNN video, and she came down, her and her mother, about probably 2 months ago, to say thank you, because she had 90 days in recovery. Last week, we had a girl who came. She had 2 weeks in recovery. She was going to the new medically assisted treatment here, Brightview. And she had got the card down there, because we give out cards, we give out information, and she had gotten the card there. And she said the best thing was she went to probation that day, and for the first time in 5 years, she dropped clean. So that's the importance of keeping them alive, because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. And giving them the resource guide, they might just throw it in their drawer. But I'll tell you what, my son Billy had his on his refrigerator for years. He might have picked up the phone and called him, but the main thing is you got to give treatment places that pick up the phone. Unfortunately, we have so many of them that when you call, you get an answering machine and then they don't call back. So that's what we work towards, to making sure the 24-hour facilities, some of the ones in Columbus, that they actually can get a person. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could, I'll add to that. There are studies out there that have shown people who use, for instance, syringe exchange services are 20 to 30% more likely to enter treatment largely because they're interacting on a regular basis with people who are not judging them, with people who are meeting them where they're at, who are providing tools that are keeping them healthy and safe, that show that they care about them, that they have dignity just as a human being. And so that alone is very impactful on many people. There are studies showing that. Last year for Overdose Awareness Week, we did a Naloxone Saves memorial service at the church. And the highlight for me was there was a lady in one of the pews. She was in tears the whole time, and she came up to me after the service and gave me a hug and said that she had just overdosed for like the third time that year on heroin 3 weeks prior to the service. But now she was in treatment and she was going to make it for her kids. And it was only because somebody was there with naloxone to revive her that she was still alive. And that this meant so much to see somebody in the faith community doing this kind of thing, not just writing her off and letting her go, but advocating that she should have, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a 100th chance if necessary. 9 out of 10 people, they may never make it, but 1 out of 10 of them will, if we provide those kind of tools that keep them alive and safe and healthy. And that's the whole ball game right there. So
Josh, if people might push back on you all and say, aren't you enabling people to use drugs then? So are you not have a problem with it? Are you enabling them by giving them these things? How do you
we're enabling them to live, I really don't have a whole lot of time for people who come with that line of thought. I ask them, are you going to bring that to me when it's your son or daughter? And then if they say no, which obviously they wouldn't, okay, well, let's talk then from there. If they say yes, well, then I say, well, I'm not interested in talking to the kind of person you are anyway, So we're enabling people to live. If they're going to abuse, if they're going to take advantage, big deal. We're here to love and to serve. That's what it is. That's what we all need, whether we use drugs or not.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much from everyone engaging in that. It's so important to meet folks where they're at, especially now when so many things are impacting the existing struggles of addiction. Stephanie, want to close us out?
Thank you, Mona. Thank you to Nikki and Josh and Trish. You all bring so much to the communities and really set such an amazing example for all of us to follow. With Nikki and Josh, we got to hear from you in some ways that faith leaders are supporting those impacted by addiction in their communities. So I'm just going to briefly go over other practical ways congregations can do no harm. Keep informed on pending legislation about addiction and opiate use disorder, whether it's good or bad. Attend workshops and conferences, webinars like the ones we're doing now. Contact your local elected representatives to talk about what your community needs in order to support those in need. Work with local health departments for easier and wider distribution of MAT and Narcan. I know with our local health department, they distribute it via the mail, so it doesn't really cover our unsheltered population. Really, the only way that Narcan's getting out in our community is by New York Homeless Outreach. So that's kind of where we're at in Licking County with that. Participate in community events such as Overdose Awareness Day. We had ours on the 31st of August, and this was the 6th National Overdose Awareness Day. Trish Perry started this 6 years ago. She is literally the driving force behind National Overdose Awareness Day. It would not take place if she was not behind that. Keep in contact with advocacy groups like Ohio Can, Newark Homeless Outreach, VOAN, Harm Reduction Ohio. And I also wanted to take the opportunity, September is National Recovery Month. And the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, I know that they have a whole series of webinars on that, educational webinars that people can get on, just to educate yourselves. Also, I'll take the time to, Jack Schuler, the author of This is Ohio, the Overdose Crisis and Front Lines of the New America. Jack sat down on the corner of Buena Vista and Maine at Newark Homeless Outreach. He sat down with the people, our unsheltered population, our population who are in active addiction, and wrote a book about it. So, you know, educating ourselves that way is definitely an option as well. Partner with other community organizations for community events about addiction. The community needs to be educated about the important role a person's faith can play in the treatment and recovery process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you for those plugs too. You said September is month of addiction. What was it? I sorry, don't want to butcher it.
It's National Recovery Month.
National Recovery Month. That's awesome. That's awesome. Right. Are there any events you know of, or is it just kind of like a advocacy thing that's going on?
Yeah, they're doing just National Recovery Month webinar series.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's such an important topic to talk about, and it's never really a never-ending conversation. We can always help those in need. All right, everyone, we are just about done here. Thank you to everyone that came and participated in conversation. It was absolutely amazing. I know I learned a lot, and I helped prep for all this and still learn so much. So thank you to everyone and what they brought today. There are so many real ways we can be helping those in our communities, and we saw that today with the amazing leaders that are on this call. I hope everyone also learned something new today. I know I did. So before we go, I do have a few asks of everyone. The fight against addiction is a big one, and we can't do it alone. So I know folks that were on the last call already did this, but it doesn't hurt to do it again. And for the new folks, I encourage you to join in. Could I get everyone to pledge or continue pledging, if you're on the last call, to becoming a caring congregation, and then also pledge to do no harm in your community? And if you can pledge to do that, go ahead and put a star in the chat. Awesome. And after we all pledge to do no harm in our communities, we're even doing that by being on this call, which is awesome. So my second ask is going to be that everyone join us for our third webinar on September 14th, where we continue this conversation. And we're going to go more in depth about naloxone and how it works and how to distribute it and how that plays a role within faith communities. Again, as we saw today, that work is already taking place and being so successful and helpful in parts of Newark and in other parts of Ohio. So we can continue that work to save more lives. So please join us for our third webinar. Everyone that's on the call will get a follow-up email that has resources like recording to this call, slides, and then a registration link for the next webinar. And if you register for this one, you should be automatically registered for the next one. But that link will be in that email just in case. And finally, I can't emphasize enough how important spreading the word about this is. So we need as many people to join the fight against addiction as we can. So I'm going to ask that if you're going to come to the next webinar on the 14th, bring 2 friends, family members, aunts, uncles, church members, sons, maybe a pet if you want. But the more people we have committed to becoming part of a caring congregation, the better. I don't know if Leisha, Wendy, Stephanie, Misty, if any of you have any last comments, or anyone else. Actually, open it to the whole floor. All right.
Thank
Well,
you. I learned quite a bit tonight. Thank you very much.
of course.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks for coming.
Welcome.
I just wanted to thank everybody too for being on the call, and also if you're on this call and you're watching this as a video after the fact, and you have some particular questions that are still remaining, or there's things that you want to see us cover in our upcoming, we have 2 more webinars. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us. And I'm not sure where I would send that email, but info at svdpcolumbus.org. So info at sv as in Victor, D as in dog, P as in Paul, columbus.org. You can send us some any comments or questions, and we can try to work that into any future conversations that we are facilitating about the topic.
Wendy, I just put in the chat. Did I spell it right?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We hope to see you on the next one. And remember that together we can all do no harm. Have a good night. Team, if you want to stick on after this. Otherwise, take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.